Hello, History Lovers. Here is a very special bite-sized audio artwork in the form of a beautiful project called On the Edge by Sinead Roarty. And it's followed by a conversation I had with her about the work. Sinead is a creative practitioner who lives between New York and Sydney and makes time-based media. This particular piece of work was part of her non-traditional PhD at UTS. And heads up, it's best listened to on headphones if you've got them.
If you're an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person, we want you to know this soundwork contains references to people who have died. It also contains content about suicide.
Did you hear that?
Hear what?
Listen.
Was that your stomach grumbling?
Shh.
What did you hear?
Here. I think I could hear. Here.
Now, you're right near the Gap, aren't you?
Yeah. This is called Gap Park, just opposite
Just
here.
opposite you is Gap Park. And this is a notorious place for suicides, isn't it?
That's correct.
You have been known to help people at this time.
Yeah.
When did you start doing this?
Well, almost from the time we moved in. I mean, in those days, there was a tram line that went past here down to Watson's Bay, and there was a stop just over where the bus stop is now.
What do you say to people?
Would you like to come over and have a cup of tea and talk about it?
Have they ever come over?
Oh, yes. Yes,
Really?
quite a few.
It must be very emotional with some of them.
Oh, yeah.
Do they tell you their stories?
Some of them do, yeah.
It must affect you.
Oh, I get used to it now. Yeah.
But you keep doing it. How many people would you say you've saved?
Well, I don't know. They worked it out that over the times, if it was 4 times a year, and it would be 4 times a year on any year, even now it would be 4 times a year. That's 160. And I'm sure it'd be a lot more than that because, as I say, I don't keep notes on them.
Rexy seemed to have like a sixth sense. If anybody put their leg over that fence, Rexy sensed that there was something wrong. She would literally drag me up She used to sit there and watch the people and see that everything was in order, and if it wasn't, she would interfere and just see to it that nothing happened to anybody up there.
Here is the Prime Minister of Australia, the Right Honourable R.G. Menzies.
It is my melancholy duty to inform you officially that in consequence of a persistence by Germany in her invasion of Poland, Great Britain has declared war upon her, and that as a result, Australia is also at war.
You know this was a military post. There are underground tunnels everywhere.
Here?
Yeah, here. See down there? That's where the Dunbar sank in the 1850s.
That's a long way down.
Yeah. No one could get down there to save them in the storm. They just saw them getting smashed up against the rocks.
All got eaten by sharks.
Yeah, true.
How many survivors?
Just one, and then he became the lighthouse keeper.
Sounds like they needed one.
Yeah. 121 people died. It was the worst tragedy Sydney had experienced.
You mean the worst tragedy the settlers had experienced?
Yeah. You can dive the wreck. There are 100 pianos in the cargo and they're all still down there.
100 pianos?
Mm-hmm. 100 ghost pianos lying at the bottom of the sea. And 121 ghosts. Did you hear that?
No?
Tell me the names again.
Friendship.
Yes.
Charlotte.
Charlotte, that's it.
Alexander.
Good.
Scarborough.
Very good. Prince of Wales. Lady
Penryn.
Borrowdale. Golden
Grove.
And Supply. And the 11th ship? Sirius.
Smallpox?
Devil, devil.
Devil, devil.
Yes, Mr. D. Devil, devil.
We went on board 3 boats to go around to Port Jackson. We arrived in the afternoon and surveyed round. Then coming on dark, we landed on a beach on the south side and pitched our tents for the night. We named it Camp Cove.
Bira, bira.
Bira, bira?
Bira, bira.
Bira, bira.
These waters, around what you call Camp Cove.
Bira, bira.
Bira, bira, galleon.
Bira, bira, galleon.
Bira, bira, galleon means her tribe, this place of waters around what you call Camp Cove. This is women's teaching place.
No one talks about it.
About what?
All the missing bodies. Suicides, the shipwreck, smallpox. There've been murders here. It's like a 230-year crime scene.
Sad.
Yeah. And yet, it's so beautiful here at the same time.
Nago! Nago!
Yes, Governor!
Do you know? You are the first white man that ever caught a fish in Sydney Cove!
First of many, Governor!
Hey, look there. Have you seen the women in canoes singing while fishing?
Did you hear that?
Actually, I did.
Oh.
Let's stay a while.
Yeah, let's.
Can we sit here with you?
Yeah, wenga. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, wenga. Mm-hmm.
It's a great pleasure now to be here with Sinead Roarty to talk about this fantastic piece, On the Edge. Sinead is a creative practitioner who lives between New York and Sydney and makes time-based media. This particular piece of work was part of her non-traditional PhD at UTS. I was really struck in listening to your piece for the first time on its really rich soundscape, particularly in the opening sections, but of course it runs all the way through. And you mix these archival grabs and these different forms of sound. So we start with the suicide at the Gap, the archival tape about someone assisting people in trouble. We go back to Menzies, who's declaring war, Second World War. We hear about the wreck of the Dunbar in the 1850s, a reenactment of a conversation between an Aboriginal woman, an imagined conversation, I think, an Aboriginal woman and a colonist, and right back to a song of You're a Fisherwoman, which I immediately recognised from History Lab's Series 1, Fishing for Answers. Listeners here will also remember that haunting song. And it contains a kind of temporal flow that is both historical because it's in time, it's got all these points of temporal reference, but it also brings the listener into the middle of that. It disrupts historical time and you feel like you're being drawn into a sort of temporal present. So I'm just wondering what you wanted to achieve with this.
That's so interesting, isn't it? Because time, it was something that was very important to the colonists when they first came to Sydney and sited themselves at Camp Cove and South Head. What I was attempting to do is disrupt the sense of a chronological story and introduce something that was not such a dominant narrative, one thing led to another, led to another, led to another, but that there are multiple narratives coexisting at the one time. And so to reset an idea of place when you're there, so it is not just, as it is perceived today, as a suicide site, but a site that is able to hold multiple stories and also to reveal stories that have been hidden, the silences that have been there over time.
Thank you for mentioning place, because it is of course a very situated piece, the story. For people that know Sydney well, they'll know that the Gap is at South Head. They may not know other aspects of the story that your piece draws forth, but perhaps those from outside Sydney are not as aware of the specific context that you're invoking. You say that the work is best experienced at the Don Ritchie Grove, which is located not far from the Gap Lookout. I wonder if you could say a little bit about why that's changed their experience of being in place. I think that's your phrase, being in place.
The Don Ritchie Grove is a space that was created after Don Ritchie died. He was, of course, the gentleman in the piece that's talking about having saved upward of 160 lives just by asking people to come and have a cup of tea. And the space was created away from the noise of the tourist buses in this beautiful grove to enable people to have quiet contemplation. What I wanted to achieve by using sound to create something that would disrupt the idea of the view, the visual dominance of the looking which happens at Camp Cove and South Head. By using headphones at this site, it's about allowing someone to totally immerse themselves in the binaural experience. So it's a VR experience, to have a visceral connection with the site, with a tool that enables an empathetic reaction and ontological reaction to the site that might change your experience of it.
And is that what you mean when you say being in place, that it's about a body in situ, and that situ involves all of the historic contexts that have flowed through that place?
I wanted it to be listened to in a way that engages the whole body in place in a very different way. So instead of just walking through the space and acknowledging its dominant history as a suicide destination, to be able to surrender in a very visceral way to its layered history.
I mean, one of those layers, and many of those layers, are to do with the silence. You've mentioned that already, I think. And in the piece, they're really represented by all the bodies that lie at the bottom of the ocean for different sorts of reasons. And I've got a few questions about what it is as an audio maker to give voice to the unheard, particularly when those unheard are historical figures. They're not alive to kind of interview. You've got these lovely invocations of characters and people in your piece. There's the You're a Fisherwoman's song, which you use, which we know from Series 1 of History Lab was first noted down by the French explorer Louis de Freycinet in 1819 and was sung on that episode by Madeleine Collier. You've also used these archival tapes that you can hear as having a historic quality. But those archival grabs are often reporting on events, or they're Don talking about his work with the troubled who came to the Gap. It's much harder sometimes to get those voices of the troubled themselves or of the drowned, how the historical drowned. And you do this thing towards the end where you reenact, I think, or I'm guessing it's an imagined conversation between the Aboriginal woman and a colonist. And a conventional historian might say, well, can these different types of sources be presented alongside each other? They're quite different, without the kind of contextualization or the notation of their sources of origin. And I'm guessing you have quite a different perspective on that. So, what would you say to that as a conventional historian?
Yes, I did take liberties, but it's also very grounded in research. I did a PhD dissertation that went alongside this, and a lot of the material is, as you say, archival or oral history. So I reference people like Ross Gibson and Grace Karskens. Grace Karskens came up with some really amazing, revealing information about the gendered nature of place, i.e. that Gab Cove Waters was a women's teaching place. So I did take liberties and imagined how to actually bring sounds to the silenced and to redress that history of silencing. Key events were reconstructed from these field recordings and colonial journals and oral histories that were, sitting at the edge of history. And then I also used silence as a device to draw attention to the complex silences at play. And also did things, I really wanted to create a sense of the sandstone and the history that's baked into that sandstone and what is in the layers of the sandstone over time. So I created a place sound that drew attention to the ephemeral sounds that are there. So you have, of course, the rescue helicopters, you have the sirens, you have the bird song, and you also have, let's call it the unheard sound of the landscape itself. And what I did for that was tap into the Schumann resonance, which is known as the Earth's heartbeat at 7.83 hertz, and it operates as the same frequency as our brain's alpha waves. So it gives you a really kind of calming feeling when you listen to it. And so I wanted to actually embed that throughout so that the experience of listening to the work would also calm those who may be troubled when they go there. Added to that, there was to give a sound to those who had perished in the sinking of the Dunbar. And there were, of course, the 121 people who perished, but there were 100 pianos that sank at the same time. So I commissioned a piece using 121 keys of a piano to, create some kind of, I guess it is an imagined sort of eulogy for those people that perished there. And then, of course, the wonderful Eora fisherwomen, you had created the song that had been heard by Frisiane in your podcast, and to be able to use that song just really helped me to give voice to the Biribirigal who had been silenced.
It's very moving in a way to hear you describe the stories that sit behind the sounds that we've just heard. And is there a place that listeners can go to find some of those stories? Because you don't kind of get that context in the work itself, and that's perhaps some of its power. But there's another power in just listening to you describe the eulogy that the pianos offer, or the heartbeat of the earth, which is a very beautiful idea, but also it makes us think about what we've heard in another guise. Is there a place to find that information?
Yes, if you go to ontheedge.space, there is an appendix that describes where all the sources are from and the stories behind the different pieces, the different beats within the sound work. The PhD is being developed into a book which goes into the more kind of anchored theory as well, and research that informed the sound work. The sound work is in many ways an enactment of the research that was in the PhD.
So separately, you reflect on the way that sound has played a vital role in the construction of post-colonial Australian national identity, an often under-considered role. And you mentioned, I think, the heated debates about the national anthem as an example. And I wondered if you thought there was a particularly, especially, if you're working between New York and Sydney, if there's a particularly Australian sonicscape, what that sounds like. We've been thinking here a little bit about what an Australian podcast format is and whether that's different to an American and an English podcast format. And so these questions are all related, but they tend not to be asked in the same way that question would be asked for literary forms, for example.
Paul Carter is a way better person to answer that than me. He writes very much about what the Australian sound is, the kiwi, the bird song, the sound of our nature and how it impacts us. And I think it's really interesting when we think about how, the voice to Parliament, just using the language of a voice to parliament created such an intense debate in the Australian public. And as you point out, when we talk about the anthem, there is furious disagreement about what the sound of Australia should be. But it is very different to the sounds of other countries. There is definitely an opening. The landscape really, I believe, informs our oral landscape. I was very interested in recording the sound of South Head itself. And the sandstone was an essential part of that. The sandstone, that sedimentary history is baked into that landscape. The Golden Gateway, when people arrived by sea, as they did, until the 70s, they passed South Head as they went into Sydney Harbour. The sounds of the troubled that go there, the sounds of the sirens, the sounds of the helicopters. And to do that, I did a lot of field recordings. I took my microphone, I sunk it in between the rocks. I went there at different times during the day and throughout the night to pick up on the sounds that were there. For me, it felt like a place that, although there are so many layers of silencing, is very loud.
And it's really inspiring to hear the way you're talking about that and also your techniques for collecting those sounds. It does raise the question, why did you choose sound as your preferred medium for this particular investigation?
I consciously chose a medium that's ephemeral by nature and not material. And I did that because I didn't want to leave a mark on the place. I didn't want to do something that was adding in a conscious way to the markers that have already been put there. If there were to be a physical memorial or signifier, then to my mind it should be something that was done by those who are unheard, who have been historically silenced at South Head. So I wanted to have something that people could experience that would not leave its mark on the place.
But leave its mark on us. So we're very grateful for the opportunity to have this conversation and also to give us a little bit of an insight into the kind of work that sits underneath what is essentially a 15-minute audio piece. And that's technical work, it's also conceptual work, it's imaginative work, and all of it is part of what goes into the production of the beautiful piece that everyone's just heard. So thank you so much, Sinead, for the work and for the opportunity to talk to you. Obviously, people have listened to the piece just now on the History Lab feed, but if they want more information, they can go to ontheedge.space to find out more about what you've just heard. And thank you, Sinead.
Thank you, Tamson.